Okay, welcome to my lesson today. We are talking about George Orwell, who is another very important English writer, appreciated and well known everywhere in the world. George Orwell is not his original name. In fact, he was born Eric Blair. He was born in India in 1903, and he was the son of a minor colonial official. Okay, he studied at Eton. Okay, what happened? Okay, he studied at Eton, okay, and he developed there a very independent and nonconformist personality, becoming indifferent to all the accepted values of his time. And he was at the same time an atheist and a socialist. When he left the college, he didn't go to university, but he started to work for the Indian Imperial Police in Burma. But he didn't like his job, and in particular, he didn't like the life there. So he returned to England. Okay, and when he returned to England, he started to write, and he never stopped all his life, becoming also a very important journalist and reporter, war reporter in particular. He got married in 1936, and the same year he went to Catalonia in order to follow as a journalist, the Spanish Civil War. To report about the Spanish Civil War. In 1941, he also worked for the BBC, and in 2 years later, he also became an independent and literary editor. But he died very early of tuberculosis in 1950, so his life was very short. Okay. During his life, we can say that what is important to remember about his life is just a few details, but in particular that he was always against any kind of totalitarianism. It was against violence, against oppression, okay, and more or less all his works are based on these main basic idea of George Orwell. He also decided to change his name when he first published his first work, because he didn't want to be recognized. He wanted to remain anonymous, but he later became known as George Orwell. Why did he decide to be called George Orwell? Orwell is a very small river in the northeast of London that he particularly liked because of the atmosphere of the place. And George was a very common, typical English name, so he matched together these two names. Okay, now we go straight to the most important work. Okay, this is the first work he wrote, Down and Out in Paris and London. Okay, he actually, in order to write this first work, he had a direct experience of living in London and then in Paris as a beggar. Okay, because he wanted to see directly with his own eyes if there was a real help from the government, from the cities for poor people. Okay, he wanted to realize if they were actually helped by the community, by the society. Okay, so he pretended for a period to be a beggar. Okay, and the result was this Down and Out in Paris and London. And for this first publication, he acquired the name. He chose the name of George Orwell. Then we have also Burmese Days, okay, is based on his experience in the colonial service. He criticized the way the English people treated the Indian people, okay. Then we have, okay, the road to Wigan Pier, but it is also an important report for the miners in the north of England, in the industrial north of England. But homage to Catalonia, which was based on the Civil War. And one of the novels, the first novels he wrote, is Animal Farm. Okay, and thanks to this first novel, to this first particular novel, fictional novel, he became internationally known and financially wealthy, okay, secure. And then 1984, which is his most known, well-known and most original novel. Okay, so what about the artist's development? He rejected being a nonconformist. He rejected the English background he had, and because he was completely open to new ideas and impressions. And he also was convinced that the role of the artist was that of informing people of the real facts, of the real situations of other people, okay, and in particular of the weakest social classes, okay. Okay, let's see the social themes. He dedicated to social themes, so he was influenced by Dickens, because he decided to describe the weakest classes using a realistic language, of course, and trying to underline that normally misery is the result of poverty, and society is normally ready to deprive people, in particular the lower social classes, of their life, of their rights. And as I had already told you, he was against totalitarianism and the violation of liberty and tyranny in all its forms, and it is particularly evident from his novels and his writings in general. Okay, 1984 is the novel we are going to analyze, but I don't want to talk to you about this novel before you read the passage. So we first read the passage. I first give you to study and read the passage, and then we are going to analyze the novel.
Emphasized by the blue oval glass doors of Victory Mansion.
Orwell. Big Brother is watching you.
It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end of it, a coloured poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than a metre wide. The face of a man of about 45, with a heavy black moustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times it was seldom working, and at present the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. "Big Brother is watching you," the caption beneath it ran. Inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of pig iron. The voice came from an oblong metal plaque, like a dulled mirror, which formed part of the surface of the right-hand wall. Winston turned a switch, and the voice sank somewhat, though the words were still distinguishable. The instrument, the telescreen, it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. He moved over to the window, a smallish, frail figure, the meagreness of his body merely emphasized by the blue overalls, which were the uniform of the party. His hair was very fair, his face naturally sanguine, his skin roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades and the cold of the winter that had just ended. Outside, even through the shut window pane, the world looked cold. Down in the street, little eddies of wind were whirling dust and torn paper into spirals. And though the sun was shining and the sky a harsh blue, there seemed to be no colour in anything except the posters that were plastered everywhere. The black mustachioed face gazed down from every commanding corner. There was one on the house front immediately opposite. "Big Brother is watching you," the caption said, while the dark eyes looked deep into Winston's own. Down at street level, another poster, torn at one corner, flapped fitfully in the wind, alternately covering and uncovering the single word, "Ingsoc." In the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for an instant like a blue bottle, and darted away again with a curving flight. It was the police patrol, snooping into people's windows. The patrols did not matter, however. Only the thought police mattered. Behind Winston's back, the voice from the telescreen was still babbling away about pig iron and the overfulfillment of the 9th three-year plan. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. Any sound that Winston made, above the level of a very low whisper, would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. How often, or on what system, the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. But at any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to live, did live, from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and, except in darkness, every movement scrutinized. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though, as he well knew, even a back can be revealing. A kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. This, he thought with a sort of vague distaste, this was London, chief city of Airstrip 1. Itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with baulks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard and their roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all directions? And the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air and the willow herbs straggled over the heaps of rubble, and the places where the bombs had cleared a larger patch, and there had sprung up sordid colonies of wooden dwellings like chicken houses. But it was no use. He could not remember. Nothing remained of his childhood, except a series of bright-lit tableaux, occurring against no background and mostly unintelligible. The Ministry of Truth, Mini-True in newspeak, was startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up, terrace after terrace, 300 metres into the air. From where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picked out on its white face in elegant lettering, the 3 slogans of the party. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.